We are live.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Maggie Ullman, and I am the chair of our new Environment and Safety Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to our February 28th remote meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud so that folks can kind of follow and track. And we are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. Thanks for being here. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. We know that a previous call, there was some challenges with the queue. Staff just spent the last 15 minutes doing some double checking and having different staff call in, get into the queue, raise their hands. So we feel really prepared, having put that extra time in to make sure there won't be any technical difficulties today. Thanks, staff, for doing that. And if you would like to call in and comment live, you can use the same number, which is 855-925-2801 with the meeting code 9477. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers need to push *3 to enter that speaker queue. So to get us rolling, I'm going to do roll call. I'll introduce both the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. When I call your name, why don't you come off mute and say a quick hello. So first, Vice Mayor Sandra Kilgore, welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
And Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Our City Manager, Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Our Assistant City Manager, Ben Woody.
Good morning, everybody.
Our Deputy City Attorney, John Maddox.
Good morning.
Our Deputy Chief Baumstruck.
Good morning.
APD's Financial Business Manager, Elise Lewis. Good morning. The Fire Chief, Scott Burnett.
I'm standing in for Chief Burnett, Assistant Fire Chief Patrick Crudup.
Well, we are lucky. Welcome. Glad you're here. And Sustainability Director, Bridget Herring.
Good morning.
And the Associate Vice President of Energy at AECOM, Karen Massey, who worked with the Sustainability Department on the sustainability plan we're going to be talking about. Karen, glad you're here. You are on mute, but I see you smiling, so the video is working, which is good. So thanks, everybody, for that roll call. And let's go ahead and get started. I will offer, as our agenda starts, the first item is public comment. Folks will notice, if you're looking at the agenda, this committee meeting is different than our other committee meetings, that we have public comment both at the front end and at the back end. So I'll open that in just a minute, but just want to note that we'll kind of see how this goes. If it's really, there's ample space and ample comment, we'll consider keeping those. Otherwise, we might shift to having one public comment session, but we'll kind of make that call at another time. So starting, do we have anyone in the queue to start us off with public comment today?
No, we do not.
Okay, thanks, Katie. The next step is approval of the January 24th minutes. Do I have a motion?
Sandra, so moved.
Second.
Great, and I will do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Kilgore?
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith?
Aye.
And myself, aye. All right. So the next agenda item, actually the next two agenda items will be from our police department. The first is the APD contract and renewal for evidence EQ. Hello, everyone. Okay, so let's do the next slide. So APD has two requests today. We request to either renew or enter into two new contracts with two vendors. The first one is to renew our contract with Evidence IQ, which we purchased last year, a ballistics IQ system, for an additional 3-year term. The ballistics IQ, which is produced by Evidence IQ, is the only automated ballistics imaging triage solution, enabling immediate scanning of ballistics evidence
providing law enforcement with real-time, unbiased, forensic-based intelligence on gun crimes in the city. And our second request is to enter into a contract with US ISS Agency LLC, who were selected for award after a request for proposal process. They will provide us with background checks and polygraph testing, which ensures APD has the ability to better protect the safety of the residents of Asheville and Buncombe County by allowing as many sworn staff as possible to be available for patrol duties. Next slide. So the Evidence IQ renewal and also an addendum to the contract. We entered into a contractual agreement with Evidence IQ on February 1st in 2022 for the purchase of a ballistics IQ triage solution, which included a camera box, licensing, training, and unlimited virtual correlation center cartridge cases. The first year of the contract included unlimited cases. A subscription service agreement and additional case packs are needed annually to continue using the ballistics IQ solution. Evidence IQ offers discounted annual rates when contracting for longer term periods, which is why we're asking for a 3-year extension on this, not just a single year. In the first year of use, ballistics IQ was used to examine 630 cases, including cases from years prior to 2022. And as a result, we were able to produce 137 investigative leads. Our forensic unit has determined the appropriate annual package to move forward to meet their needs. We're requesting approval to review and amend the current contract, which was valued at $70,800 for an additional 3 years at $79,500 per year for a total contract value of $309,300, thus requiring council's approval to proceed with that contract. We're asking also for ratification of the renewal back to February 1st. And we already include this expense in our annual budget, so no additional funding is required. Next slide. So our requested action is that the committee recommend we move forward to full council on March 14th, that we allow APD to renew and amend the contract with Evidence IQ for an additional 3-year term for continuing the subscription service agreement and purchase of additional BCC cartridge cases for our ballistics IQ triage solution, which will be valued at $309,300. Okay, next slide. The second request is for approval from council contract with US ISS Agency. Yes, Devin?
I was wondering if the chairperson wanted to take that item separately with a vote or move to, or
Sure.
do them both at the same time. I think it'd probably be easier if you all did it
Separately.
separately. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Great suggestion. Yeah, if you don't mind going back to that previous slide. Yeah, so open this up for any comments or discussion from my council folks. I mean, I can start by saying I feel like this allows us to pursue really solving crimes with more efficiency and some more tools and resources. So I don't really have any concerns.
And I don't either. And if we, Councilwoman Smith, do you have a comment or anything?
I don't have a comment. I do have a question. You did offer information about this tool leading to some investigative leads. Has it led to clearance of any crimes?
Yes, ma'am. We solved a homicide last year using this tool.
Okay, thank you.
And if we have no more questions, I'd like to make a motion. Okay, like a motion to approve a resolution to ratify hold on just a minute.
Here.
Hold on just a minute. Okay. A motion to allow the adoption of a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute on behalf of the city of Asheville a contract not to exceed $360,000 for US ISS Agency LLC for police
that's not the one.
That's not, yeah, I was on the right one at first. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Let's try this again, okay? Okay, motion to approve. A resolution to ratify the contract for Evidence IQ to allow for the renewal of the additional 3 years for continuing the subscription service agreement and purchase of additional virtual correlation center cartilage cases for the Asheville Police Department's ballistic IQ triage solution, now valued at $309,300.
Second.
All right, I'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Kilgore,
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith,
Aye.
and myself, aye. Motion passes to move towards full council on March 24th or on March 14th, excuse me. Thanks for that suggestion, Deborah, to kind of do one at a time. So let's continue with the PowerPoint on the other proposed resolution.
Okay, so this is a request that we are allowed to contract with USS-ISS agency to provide police applicant background checks and polygraph testing services. They were identified for award based on a request for proposal process. All police officer candidates and civilian employees that work for APD must pass a background investigation and polygraph test before they are hired. We're currently understaffed and do not have sworn administrative staff available to complete these hiring functions, given the volume of new personnel needing to be vetted for hire. We have also found that dedicating a vendor to perform these processes has shortened turnaround time from APD working these internally with our current limited staff. We will execute a contract to include 2 optional renewals, planning to encumber $120,000 each year. And we already budget for this expense in our annual operating budget. Next slide. So we're requesting that the committee recommend we move to full council on March 14th to allow for the city manager to execute on behalf of the city of Asheville a contract not to exceed $360,000 with USISS Agency, LLC, for a police applicant background check and polygraph testing provider to include the option to renew annually for 2 one-year extensions upon budgetary approval by council for each fiscal year.
Thank you.
That's it.
Appreciate that. So I can kind of open up. I'm curious if to hear from my teammates on council. I, again, not only have no concern with this one, but I welcome it. I think that the way we hire is really important. And as we've heard our police chief mention before, that we really need to understand folks' character and make sure that it really serves Asheville. And I think this type of resource will help us have stronger hiring process amidst our challenges with hiring. So I think this would be, again, full support. I also feel like, given the context of, you know, anyone who woke up and read the paper this morning, we know that we're really struggling, not only downtown, but in our public housing and in our neighborhoods everywhere. We're feeling the impact of a downward trend of having staff in our police department. And it's really concerning to me. And I think contracts like this to help us have stronger, more effective, efficient hiring to get the best character of participants into our police force is fantastic. And it's also challenging. We know that from the first time a trainee sits at a desk to when they walk on the sidewalk takes 14 months. It takes a long time to get back up. And even as we're rehiring folks, they're just barely filling the vacancies. You know, we rarely have a surplus. And so I think continue to move forward with administrative functions like this to get better services to support hiring is important. And I just want to shed light and gratitude to the police department for waking up and doing this work when y'all are so understaffed, and share, you know, to the public that I know we are all very concerned about this and folks on council are concerned. So I don't know, Councilwoman Smith or Vice Mayor Kilgore, any thoughts on this contract or anything come up here in some of what I was sharing?
Agree. I'll make a motion to allow the city manager to execute on behalf of the city of Asheville a contract not to exceed $360,000 with USISS Agency, LLC, for a police applicant background check and polygraph polygraph testing provider to include the option to renew annually for 2 one-year extensions upon budgetary approval by council for each fiscal year.
This is Sandra. I'll second.
Great. So motion to approve is seconded. So Councilwoman Smith,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kilgore,
Aye.
and myself, aye. The motion passes for us to recommend to move to full council on March 14th to approve this. Another thought before we shift to the other elements of the agenda is, I know, again, there's so much moving around and there's so much conversation and concern in the public and from council around public safety. I also know that many of us are participating in a conversation tomorrow with downtown business owners and downtown workers and residents to hear about crime and concerns about crime. I wonder if a future agenda item, we could really kind of hear some of the data to see what is coming from the police department, to really take what we're seeing and feeling when we walk downtown, to give us some of the data background on what's happening. Do you think that would be something we could address in a coming call?
If that's directed to staff, I'd love to respond. Ms.
Yeah.
Owen, we have March crime data scheduled for a discussion. So it will be coming back to you at your next meeting in March.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Absolutely. And we'll make sure that we hone in on what we think are particularly high crime areas from a geographical perspective, but also by types of crime. And I hope that will be sufficient.
That is fantastic. I think the geographical area and the types will be really helpful, because I know, again, downtown, I'm feeling it and I'm seeing it. And I know that other parts of our community have been asking for more police support for some time. When we were talking about public safety recently, we had a really honest and candid public commenter share about concerns in her public housing neighborhood. And so I think that the experience we are having it might be broader than downtown, but just seeing the geographic focus areas, I think will help us have good conversation too.
Yes, ma'am. We'll be prepared.
Thanks for anticipating that. I know that y'all focus on this, and anticipating it really just shows how thoughtful y'all are being as you take us forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Also scheduled is an update on the EPIC recruitment initiative. So that will kind of link in terms of where we're going from a crime perspective, but also recruitment.
Oh, that's perfect. And I think that dovetails nicely as we have work sessions and as we are looking at the budget, really getting an update on all this information so we can be informed when we're making decisions about the budget. Thanks so much.
Ma'am. We'll get it to you.
That's fantastic. So that concludes item 4 of our agenda. And now we move on to 2 kind of items more in the environment camp. I suspect we're going to take these 2 separately as well. They're both updates for information only. We aren't seeking to have any motions from this group, but Bridget Herring, our sustainability director, is joining us. The first item is an update on the single-use plastic reduction initiative. Welcome, Bridget.
Good morning, everyone, members of council and those of the public that are joining us remotely. Again, my name is Bridget Herring and I'm the Sustainability Director, and wanted to give you an update on the single-use plastic reduction project that council directed staff to work on this past October. So if we can go to the next slide. The key takeaways that I wanted to leave you with today are: 1, that staff is still working through the proposed timeline that we presented to you in the October 2022 meeting. We're about a month off of where we thought we were going to be at that point in time, but don't think that's going to impact the overall timeline to get a recommendation to you all. We started with doing internal engagement with our staff to make sure that, 1, we understood where our staff was on this issue, as well as thinking about kind of this operational impact. Should we make a recommendation to move forward? And what we found from that is there was large support for moving forward with a policy in this area, but there were still a lot of concerns over feasibility, unintended consequences, and impacts to our residents and our business community, and wanting to understand more about that impact, especially on our vulnerable populations. We also started conducting an analysis of our sanitation services to see how we're processing these materials, where they're ending up, and ways of potentially improving those. And what we found is that our current services aren't really doing a great job of getting that single-use plastic into the landfill. And then particularly with the plastic bags, the unique nature of the film plastic makes it extremely difficult, both in terms of the services that we provide directly and also the ones that we contract with through our recycling provider as well, and some contamination issues there. So if we move to the next slide, just a little recap on why we're here again. On October 11th, 2022, you all directed staff to take a phased approach to this. The first phase was revising Chapter 15 to prohibit the use of single-use plastic bags for curbside brush and leaf collection. That's an action that you've already taken, that you took at the end of January, and will go into effect August 1st of 2023. And then the second was to do this kind of longer inquiry about potential regulation around single-use plastic bags at point of sale and expanded polystyrene, more commonly referred to as styrofoam, disposable foodware containers. And so we're starting to look into that process now in this phase 2. And again, this will conclude most likely in the fall with a recommendation on next steps from staff to you all. So moving to the next. So this slide might look familiar. This was the same slide that I presented at the October meeting. The only difference is we're looking to launch the public survey here in March instead of this month as we were hoping to, but otherwise still on track. So just wanted to give a little reminder of the steps that are involved with the second phase, where we'll launch a public survey that's for anybody and everybody. And then once we find out who took that, knowing that a survey outreach mechanism isn't really sufficient to hear from everybody from our community, we'll look at the voices missing and identify some more strategic approaches to talk to folks and get that input as well. And that will all inform our recommendation that eventually comes back to you. So next slide. So again, just a little, I've already mentioned these things, but the actions taken, we've updated the ordinance, we've engaged internally with city staff, started this analysis of existing sanitation services, which I think will be ongoing and evolve as we learn more about our situation and where our public is and how they're impacted. We also looked at what feasibility of alternatives could look like. So is there an option to add curbside recycling for plastic bags and styrofoam? If we didn't, what kind of other services could we provide? What infrastructure would that look like? And so far, we haven't come up with anything that really seems very feasible for us to implement. And then had started collecting some of the research from our community partners about the impacts of these products on our natural environment as well as human health. So going to the next slide. Again, mentioning that we wanted to start internally and really understand where we are as an organization before we start going into the community. And wanting to mirror the approach that we take internally that we're going to take externally. We hosted a number of focus groups with staff. We did a survey approach. And what we found out from that is, again, about 80% of the folks that participated were in support of moving forward with some kind of an ordinance or policy that might reduce single-use plastic bags at point of sale and styrofoam takeout containers. When we talked about implementation timelines, the most popular response was to look at more of 6 months to a year in terms of having a phased-in approach. Communication is really important. There's a lot of confusion about what the city is looking at, like what's in scope, what's out of scope. Plastic bottles, plastic ketchup packets, all the things, right? The questions that come up for how people utilize plastic in their lives. So being really clear and intentional about the words that we use is very important. And then again, the primary concern with moving forward was just, how do we enforce this? How do we make sure people understand it? How do we provide support to our community so this transition, if we made it, was successful and didn't negatively impact anyone, put anybody out of business or whatnot? So on the next slide, talking about, again, we did this analysis to figure out how well our sanitation services are delivering on getting these products to where they need to be, to the landfill, to be recycled if possible. And again, is what we found is that we're not really getting there. There's still a significant amount of issues with getting these products into where they need to go and their end use. Particularly plastic bags with this thin nature to shred, to get wrapped up in things, creates a unique challenge in terms of being able to process them. Their lightweight ability means that they travel far, they break down quickly. And again, when we looked at alternative management solutions, we didn't see a clear path forward and something that some infrastructure that we could build to provide that's either existing or could be built to be able to accept these items in a different way. So next slide. So these are the next steps, and this comes directly from our project page. So we do have a project page live. We have a place where people can enroll if they just want to stay informed of the initiative as they go forward. We started a frequently asked questions document so people can email us if they have questions to start gathering, what are the things out there that are really causing people heartburn when they hear about this that may or may not be included in the scope of this project. But really the next step is to go externally out into the community and start gathering that feedback. Also, in tandem with this, we are distributing some paper bags for leaf collection for folks to be able to test that out. So we're looking at kind of a phased approach of doing that as well. We're looking at doing that in the spring in conjunction with launching the survey. We're looking at doing that perhaps later in the summer and then maybe again in the fall when leaf collection really starts getting going. So trying to keep those things related, but also making sure that people understand what is a change and what's just something we're having a discussion about. And so, yeah, and then we'll come back to you in the fall. So that's just an update of where we're at. And I don't know if anybody has any questions that they'd like to share.
Vice Mayor Kilgore?
Yes, hi, Bridget. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate the report. I want to ask you a question. Like I said, I can understand the need to do this as far as protecting the environment, but I noticed that when you were speaking, you would always say single-use plastics and whatever, and then you'd say something about recycling. So are there any recycling options for plastics?
Right. So that's what we looked into to figure out where do these things go in the waste stream and is there an opportunity for that? Unfortunately, there's not an opportunity to take styrofoam that has been contaminated with food. There is not an option for that. There is an option for people to take styrofoam places that hasn't been contaminated with food, but we're specifically looking at disposable foodware. When it comes to plastic bags, there is some of the retailers have places that you can drop them off. And we're trying to work with the vendor that takes those to figure out what the opportunity is, how much they're getting from our market. Is there an opportunity to expand that, or not? So that's part of our continued conversation and investigation into anything we might recommend going forwards.
Okay, and I'm happy to see the outreach into the business community so we can sort of get an idea of the impact and what it will have on the community before we move forward. So I'm happy to see that. So thank you.
Yeah, and the survey will be available so folks can take it either from the perspective of being just a resident, being a business owner, or both. So people have that opportunity when the survey is launched. And we've spoken to some businesses about, what we're trying to do and making sure that the questions we're asking are going to help us get some of that information we're looking for.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that inquiry, Vice Mayor Kilgore, of kind of, it's like the carrot stick, the push pull. If we can be recycling and creating really effective recycling methods, how does that relate to regulating, banning this versus banning? And I think I appreciate staff's due diligence that we're taking this year on it. I also, encourage us to remember and keep sight that any waste reduction strategy is kind of put into the context of the policy we have on the books for the 50% waste reduction by 2035. And I know there's a push-pull between the time it takes to do analysis to get, metric tons down versus the time it takes to design a solution. So I understand that there's a balance in that effort, but I do just want to make sure that this is in the context of that policy goal. If that's where we're shooting towards, as well as keeping our rivers and streams as clean as possible, how far would these efforts get us towards that? And with what level of effort? So I think the process y'all are going through is really, really going to help us get to a good decision-making process by fall. Any other questions or comments on this topic?
I had a question about how you were going to develop your focus groups and other discussions during equity and engagement. We know that folks are going through engagement fatigue. And you mentioned that you would like your focus groups that you had with internal staff to kind of be mirrored in the community when you go out for engagement in the community. So my question is, knowing that folks are kind of tired of being surveyed and questioned because they feel like they've given us a lot of information that might be underutilized, what type of focus groups are you looking for? What type of are you looking for? A diverse voice, representation, or based on their opinion? How are you going to form it, and what information are you looking to gather?
Right. So we did an equity analysis, or our Department of Equity and Inclusion did an equity analysis on the engagement that had been done previously by our nonprofit partners, and we identified a number of voices that were either underrepresented or kind of missing from that engagement. And so the strategy here is to do the wide approach first with the survey and see who all takes that, recognizing that there's a variety of reasons why people wouldn't use that traditional engagement, look at whom responded, and then see who's missing, and then figure out how we're going to reach those folks individually. So I think it's hard to say in this moment, but once we see whom is missing from the conversation, then we can figure out how is that community conversation able to best happen, whether that's working with a trusted neighborhood partner to get involved in something that's already happening in that community or with that business group or whatever. If that's just like a one-on-one conversation, we need to tailor it to bringing some of those folks in. So that's the approach. And I think more about the whom is going to come up after we kind of go through this more traditional approach that we know isn't going to work for everybody. And I'm happy to share that equity analysis that we had with the October presentation, if that's helpful to identify some of the groups that we're talking about.
Thanks for that question. I mean, I really agree that fatigue can be challenging. And you'd mentioned earlier, Bridget, how we had been tracking to get input this month, but it's moved to March, and my head went, oh, that's probably good because we have the budget input survey out right now. And so, trying not to slam everybody, but I know y'all are working hard to make sure that everything across the organization is integrated and staged. But I do agree, Shanika, making sure we just don't overstay our welcome, or the equivalent of that in engagement. Any other thoughts or questions on this topic? All All right. Thanks, team. Appreciate it. All right. Let's go on to our next agenda item, which will also be with Bridget Herring, and our guest from AECOM is on the Municipal Climate Action Plan. I'm going to tip my hand on this ahead of the presentation and say I am so excited our organization is looking at an update to this plan. I think this can bring a lot of excitement and vision towards where we need to go. So Bridget, take it away.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Again, Bridget Herring, Sustainability Director. Really excited to be bringing this document to you. It's been a labor of love over the past year and a half. And the Sustainability Advisory did discuss this at their meeting last Tuesday and recommended it unanimously for adoption. But today we're just going to do an update. I brought the consultants here so that you can ask any questions about the process or where they come from and their experience and why we work together with them. And then we'll be coming back to you in March. So just to level set on where we're at. And then I'm going to turn it over to Katrina Lewis, who is with AECOM, which is the consultant that was awarded the RFP to work with us through this process. So Katrina, you want to take it away?
Yes, thanks, Bridget. And thank you everybody for having us here today, where we are equally excited to be presenting this update and get you any feedback you guys have or questions. So as Bridget mentioned, my name is Katrina Lewis. I am a vice president with AECOM's energy team and the director of our energy and ESG advisory group. My colleague Karen Massey is also on the line with us today, who helped lead the creation of this plan with Bridget and her team. I also just want to give a quick shout out to Fernleaf, who helped us understand how the city operates and interacts with its residents, as well as previous work like the resilience work and the SMP, and Eminence Partners, who is our partner who helped with funding estimates and opportunities. The city staff was also a huge help in creating this strategy and making sure that we got to where we are today. So if we go to the next slide. Before we dive into specifics of this plan, I wanted to pause and discuss a few high-level takeaways. First, this plan is focused on internal city activities and operations, or in other words, what the city can do to positively impact climate adaptation and mitigation efforts. Next, the city is not alone in its commitment to this mission. This commitment is shared by residents, staff, and city leaders. And finally, the plan helps the city to be strategic in selecting activities and when to move forward with them. The MCAPs, the Municipal Climate Action Plan, in short, MCAP, the 22 activities in there were recommended based on their impact, feasibility, and ability to advance equity. It sets forth these 22 recommended activities and looks at their resource needs, resource gaps, and how to sequence implementation. The plan is meant to be flexible so that as access to resources change or priorities shift, the plan can be adjusted to meet those realities as well. Next slide, please. There are three primary purposes of this Municipal Climate Action Plan. The first is to update the Sustainable Management Plan from 2009, given advancements made by the city, as well as changing priorities, goals, or availability of new technologies. It's also meant to prioritize internal activities of the city. There simply isn't enough resources to do everything that could be possible. So this helps to try to prioritize what can be done now and how to best use the city's resources. And finally, it aims to develop a path for continued progress and success. It does this by establishing a roadmap for continuing progress so that additional priorities can be added as things may change. In developing this MCAP, we worked hard to build on the foundation of success already in place within the city. This included reviewing existing goals, plans, actions, working with groups who are already advancing this work, like SACE and city staff, to identify, prioritize, and develop implementation plans for the 22 activities. Activities were prioritized, as I mentioned previously, based on their potential feasibility, impact, and ability to advance equity. This approach was developed in close partnership with SACE and the city, and final activities in the draft plan were also reviewed by these groups. As mentioned, the development of the MCAP began with a review of the city's internal sustainability and climate goals, plans, and actions in order to identify successes, gaps, areas for improvement. And it was based on this information analysis that we helped develop a list of potential activities that could help move the city forward. We then worked together to narrow this list of activities to the 22 that are in the final plan. And I'm going to talk you briefly through how we prioritize that before going into a little bit more detail about the plan itself. So to narrow this list of activities, the following process was used. We started by developing out prioritization factors. These are shown here on the right. Again, that impact feasibility and opportunity to advance equity. These were developed and revised based on discussions with SACE and the city, and these factors are used to score the potential activities that were identified. Next, AECOM scored the identified activities using the prioritization framework and criteria that were developed, while simultaneously, city staff took a survey that helped rank the potential impact, feasibility, and opportunity to advance equity of the identified longer list of activities. We then held a prioritization workshop with staff members to discuss the survey results, discuss how those results compared to AECOM as a third-party expert, kind of our scoring of the potential impact, feasibility, or equity impacts, and as well as other matters for discussion on how we might prioritize the different opportunities. Finally, these results are all synthesized together using feedback from all the sources I just mentioned to identify 22 activities for priority within the MCAP. Activities that weren't selected were documented for potential future integration into the city's climate work. So they're not forgotten. They're just, again, helping to prioritize how resources can be used now to make an impact on climate needs. So during our remaining time together, I'm going to walk us through the resulting goals, framework, and activities of this planning process. Next slide, please. The Municipal Climate Action Plan is organized into 3 goals. We developed this framework to help, again, make sure the city has something they could use moving forward to organize their work. These 3 goals include Goal 1, which talks about city assets, basically working to ensure that they are resilient, sustainable, and efficient. Goal 2 looks at city activities, including operations, participation, and decision-making, and looks at how sustainability and climate priorities can be embedded into how the city does its work. And finally, Goal 3 looks at how the city can be a good partner. It's how the city can support the community to be more sustainable and resilient. Next slide. Using these goals as a foundation, we developed a framework which the city can use to guide not only the implementation of this plan, but also as a structure as priorities, resources, or technologies change and new activities may be identified. So this includes the 3 items you see on the screen here. The first are the goals I just walked you through, which are these overarching areas for achievement. The next are focus areas, which are outcomes that can be advanced to the identified activities. And finally, you heard me say the number 22 a lot so far, those 22 activities, which are policies or initiatives that move the city towards its goals. Next slide, please. For the activities, the MCAP does more than just identify things that can be done, but aims to outline how they can be implemented. This includes descriptions of the specific activities, talks about the type of activity that it is, the operational resources that may be needed in order to implement the activity, funding needs, and considerations for implementation and the timeframe for implementation. I'm now going to walk you through the goals and the activities that are under each goal. Please note, there's a lot on each slide that you're going to see coming up. And the purpose isn't to review each one, but to demonstrate the types of activities within the MCAP for today. If we go to the next slide. We'll start by looking at Goal 1, which again is that goal looking at how city-owned assets can be more resilient, sustainable, and efficient. This goal has the most activities underneath it, which again, given that key takeaway that this is really focusing on what the city can do, it is not overly surprising. So we have 13 different activities identified here. You'll notice that one of them is bolded. That's just noting that it's an existing ongoing activity that the plan is uplifting and continuing to provide resources for. You'll also notice some activities have asterisks next to it. That is there to denote things that can be done in the short term. So kind of initial investments that can be made or things that can be focused on in years 1 and 2 of implementation. Next slide, please. Goal 2, the one where we're looking at how sustainability and resilience can be embedded in what the city does, has 4 activities identified within it, 2 of which are existing ongoing activities, and 1 of which can be really focused on in the short term. Next slide, please. And finally, the third piece of the puzzle, how the city can support residents and businesses in sustainability and resilience. Here we have 5 specific activities identified, 1 of which is ongoing and existing, and 2 which can be focused on in the short term. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, the goal of the strategy of the plan is not just to identify things that can be done, but try to support the city in thinking through how they can invest. The city will need to be strategic when it begins work on activities and build off existing and new successes along the way. So in the planning process, we took into account different timing considerations. These considerations included things like the need to drive progress in the short term with, balancing with longer term, maybe capital intensive activities that have a big impact. Took into account existing staff resources and their capacity to, say, develop new plans or policies to support this work. It also looked at existing timeframes for things like the capital improvement planning process or the long nature of infrastructure planning projects. And also, at its heart, made sure to consider that existing core services need to be maintained and improved, not disrupted by this process. So in creating this plan, we identified 3 different timeframes for implementation: short term, which is in a year or 2, medium term, which looks at in year 3 and 4, and longer term in years 5 and beyond. We also then identified the different implementation phases for these activities, which look at things like planning or development, things that are in planning or development, things that are in implementation, or things that are kind of simultaneously in planning and implementation. We also have those existing ongoing activities that I identified previously. If you quickly go to the next slide, this chart on the right is not meant to be read on the screen, but you can see it in more detail in the MCAP. It does denote on the top here, though, those implementation timeframes. And if you go to the next slide, on these bar graphs, it's showing you kind of how those implementation phases overlap, so that the city could say, look at the column under year 1 and say, what should we be thinking about doing for each of these identified activities? The green bars are identifying existing ongoing activities. The light blue is identifying an activity that's in maybe the planning and development stage, and the darker blues are denoting things that are either in implementation or simultaneously in planning and implementation. Next slide, please. So to recap, the Municipal Climate Action Plan focuses on municipal operations where significant opportunities exist to impact climate adaptation and mitigation. It demonstrates Asheville's commitment to sustainability and climate action and builds on the progress that has been made to date. And with the limited resources and multiple priorities, it aims to be strategic in how these things are implemented and where priorities are made. Next slide, please. So with that, we'd love to open it up for questions. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Really appreciate the presentation and, of course, the work. This is not a small effort to really apply these lenses and analysis to bring it all together. I, of course, have a handful of questions, but I can open up to teammates first. I don't know if Shanika or Sandra, if you want to start. If not, I can get us rolling. I got a nod from Vice Mayor Kilgore. Okay, so I have 4 questions or thoughts. The first question is really for the AECOM team. Your reputation precedes you. You know, I work in the climate environment space. I've worked in the city space, and you all have really I respect your firm quite a bit. And so a question that I would love to just hear your reactions to or reflections on is that you have worked with a lot of municipalities and you have worked in this space specifically for quite some time. Just curious, as you have that context from other communities and places that might not have the state level control that we do in North Carolina, or might not have massive investor owned utilities who kind of call the shots on a lot of energy stuff. Is there anything like uniquely Asheville that gives us a leverage opportunity as opposed to what is often uniquely Asheville, where our hands are tied behind our back? And I don't know if you'll have a great answer to that. I'm not trying to give you a pop quiz, just curious from the landscape that you have that you're privy to.
No, I appreciate that question. And I'm going to have Karen Massey jump in on here as the project manager for this effort.
Great. Oh, still on mute, Karen.
Karen, if you can come off mute.
You're close.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. Too many devices today. Asheville is in a really interesting position because you're a small city, but you all are really doing some amazing things given your size. And, budgets are just a reality everywhere. But Asheville really has a nice leg up. You have got people that are very committed, your residents, your leadership also, is putting a lot in, and your staff as well. So I think that's a real leg up from what we see in a lot of places, quite honestly. The other thing that I find incredible, and I'm so impressed, is you look at climate from both a climate adaptation and a climate mitigation standpoint. So it's what can we do to reduce our carbon footprint, and then what can we do to survive, weather or climate events. But you look at it not only for the city, but also as it impacts your citizens. So that's the part that Asheville is just a step beyond almost any community we see, to tell you the truth. There's always a lot of ways to go, but just the fact that you are honestly looking at all the equity that you put into, the equity considerations you put into everything you do, really puts you, in a great step forward, as far as looking out for both your community, the citizens, and what the city does itself.
Thanks, that's helpful. I think it's nice to remember and hear that type of feedback when we're facing a global challenge that every community faces, that despite some of the challenges, we do have some really special, unique opportunities. And then I'm going to kind of just go through the other points, and then we can discuss or have a conversation around them. So I'll just kind of go through them. And some of them are more for staff, like this first one. So where I'm going to go is start to bundling into kind of the priorities within the goals. And so under goal one of the priorities is to incorporate equity and sustainability into a process to address aging infrastructure, and that we're already moving towards that. Is that safe to assume that what some of that means is that as we all are doing a lot of work to consider what a bond for infrastructure could look like for our community, that we'll be able to use an equity and sustainability lens? And that's kind of, am I connecting the right dot between that? So that's kind of the first question. The second place is under goal 2, there's a line item of priority that staff are already working on to really pursue state utility policy towards climate and sustainability. And the question I have there is, or my first comment is, that's fantastic. There's so much that we can't do because of the state policy climate and because it's regulated. And I wonder if we're also referencing stormwater challenges in other goal areas. And we know that stormwater, the increase of rain and snow is going to create winter storms and flooding issues. That is the biggest climate threat that we're going to have to adapt to. I wonder if I would love to hear some reaction to, what if we pulled stormwater into that priority area as looking towards the state, that it's not just looking at the utility policy and the energy side of things, but really calling out that we want to look towards pathways of addressing stormwater from the state side, because my understanding is we really don't have a lot of opportunities to do that off of city properties. So that would be kind of a question of if that thought has come up. And then the third comment is, I love seeing that resilience hubs are in some of this priority mix. I think Councilwoman Smith, that's something, one of the first times we talked, you had mentioned of something exciting. These resilience hubs is this opportunity to create safe spaces that can weather the storm, that when the lights are out everywhere, the lights are on there. And I think that's a really interesting conversation, not only to have about places in the community that community members own and lead, but in our own facilities. So when we're looking at our public facilities and our infrastructure assessment now, I wonder if there's a way to kind of include that in the shorter timeline so that we're dovetailing what we could do with our public city facilities for resilience hubs. And the final question is under goal 3, there's mention of this climate ambassadors program, and that just sounds cool. And I would just love to hear a little more about what that might be. Does that engage youth? That sounds exciting. So I'd love to hear a little more. So I know that was a bit of a list, but I'm excited. So hopefully whatever order might feel best, perhaps maybe Manager Campbell, I would start towards you of, am I connecting the dots between that addressing our aging infrastructure and the equity and sustainability lens with bond thinking?
So thank you for that question. We are in the process of doing a capital facilities assessment, a study of all of our facilities. We will be then utilizing several lenses to prioritize and determine from the perspective of equity, sustainability, and cost, how to prioritize and invest in those facilities. And obviously that would be a conversation that we would have with council. And yes, we would use that information to help form the basis for hopefully requesting that council pursue, I guess, raising additional revenue, which could come through a bond referendum. And I don't think that staff has been shy about suggesting to you all that we need more revenues in order to address tremendous capital needs. And so, yes, your connection of the dots is accurate, but we want to do this in the context of having that base of information, which that capital facilities assessment will help inform us. And we don't think that we're going to be able to address all those needs with one bond referendum. It will be a 10, 15-year look at how do we invest and prioritize. And Bridget, if there's anything else that you think I've overlooked.
No, I think that's great. I think also we're looking at it at the project level. You know, we, through our climate justice work, developed the climate justice map that gives us some information about where people are located, what vulnerabilities they're having to deal with, and encouraging our staff to be able to utilize that information as they start to think about things on a project level in terms of where things get rolled out first, how projects are getting in the list and the queue. So I think that all kind of builds towards what Manager Campbell is talking about. And so I think we're trying to put as many building blocks in place as we can to be successful with this strategy. Do you want me to go on to the other questions or? Yeah, okay.
That was great.
See if I remembered them all. So in terms of the state policy, I think there's, definitely an opportunity to expand. We look at kind of the opportunities that we have and try and be strategic about the capacity we have and our ability to engage in those spaces, and are really kind of building some capacity in that space to do that more consistently. I think we started with energy because we had a lot of technical assistance from some of our partners with the Southeast Sustainable Directors Network and Rocky Mountain Institute. And there was some more collective action within local governments in North Carolina. And that's why those kind of bubbled to the top first. I think there's absolutely opportunity to advance it. And that conversation is starting to happen in the stormwater fee study, right? So looking at what we have opportunities to do, where we have opportunities to grow, what are those barriers, and maybe creative solutions to deal with them. So I would say that absolutely our stormwater team is on that. And I'm hopeful that those conversations are going to continue to happen through that process, which is something that'll come before you as well. And we're working with them. The Sustainability Advisory Committee is trying to work with them on that project. So trying to clue everybody into where the action's happening instead of trying to create a separate space to have that conversation in a silo. And then in terms of resilience hubs.
Could I just jump back to that one?
Sure.
So what I'm hearing is, we have a stormwater utility for those listening. So that is a place where we're putting in pipes in the ground and we are addressing stormwater and flow. And that, with that utility, we're doing some assessments of where we need to go further. I guess the question comes back to can we put it in here explicitly to put it on the map? Because what I sense with stormwater is that this conversation has been coming up for over a decade, and we always say our hands are tied by the state. We can't look at more creative solutions to address stormwater off of city facilities, and we need to start mapping towards that capacity. Now, just like you're saying, with the energy side, it's taken 10 years to build some of that collective influence at a state level, but I feel like explicitly putting it on the map, given that this plan will be ours for at least the next 10 years, I think doesn't mean that we need to expect tomorrow to have that collective action strategy or that influence at the state level, but really putting it in the target zone acknowledges that there's a real limit to what we will be able to do locally from a regulatory or policy standpoint on stormwater. So I just would love, when we look at this next time, to see if there's a way for that, and if not, to really understand the concern to do that.
So I'm hearing some more information about the constraints, how we're regulated in that space, some of the constraints and the opportunities that we do utilize to try and advance the field in this.
Or more explicitly, like, is there an opportunity in this plan to add that into the priority line item that says we're going to be working towards state level change that's focused on energy utility stuff now, but to really explicitly call in and call out that we want to work towards stormwater stuff as well. And if that doesn't make sense, given so much of the analysis that y'all have done, like, help me understand. But I think that call out could be really beneficial, even if it takes a while for us to build the capacity to really have huge impact at the state level on this topic.
I can definitely take a look at it. It might be more appropriate to keep it in the stormwater section with just a call out to how we're engaging at a higher level to deal with this as well. So I can definitely take a look and see where it could best fit.
Great, thanks.
I was just wondering, Maggie, and this is for our audience and for myself too, when you talk about being able to the stormwater, bring it in of the sustainability and all that, could you even give us an example of what state laws are preventing us from doing certain things that could actually benefit this program?
Sure. I think a lot of it comes into, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we have anyone from the stormwater division here, but there's the stormwater utility where we're putting pipes in the ground to move and channelize the water to the river, or we're putting plants in the ground to suck up the water like straws. And that's a function that we will continue to play. It still is a challenge when we have less plants in the ground and more asphalt and more impermeable pavement. So the more hard space as our community grows means water's just going to run right off of that down into the river and cause flooding. And so the way that our UDO is structured, the way that we have conversations with the private community when they're building or making changes on their property, there isn't a lot of opportunity for us to even offer great carrots in those development conversations, let alone sticks. Not that I would want to start with some sticks, but I think that right now it can just be challenging from the UDO perspective and the growth and development perspective for us to really figure out what changes as we grow could be made so that the water is getting absorbed on site faster than just running into the river and causing flooding.
And there
Is that helpful?
Well, yeah, and there are mechanisms that you have that we can be utilizing, because I know even in plan and zoning, basically they restrict the different asphalt and permeable surfaces because of that reason, and a lot of them are penalized if they, have large surfaces or whatever. But you're saying there's natural ways that we can actually control this runoff without using.
Like green infrastructure is kind of the buzzword, but then the stormwater rules that we enforce right now are set by the state, and we can't make any local adjustments to them unless there's a state conversation. Yet not every city in the state is challenged with the volume of rain that we have and our mountainous surfaces, which creates our flooding dynamics.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
You ready to move on to resilience hubs?
All right.
Okay. So resilience hubs is something, and I know, we've spoken about this before, that can exist on private property. They can exist on public property. The important thing is that there's a good agreement, understanding between the community and the city as an organization of like, what are those roles? What are those responsibilities? Who is, taking care of what pieces and making sure that that's something the community wants. I think we're at the beginning stages of those conversations. And so want to make sure that we take the time to set a good foundation. And that's why we didn't put it as day one, let's go do this right now, because we really need to have those conversations and understand where they need to be, who's invested in them to make that a successful strategy. What I can say, though, in the short term, in terms of our city assets, when we talked about those resilience considerations for city assets, that's a place where we can start looking at what we have and how we build those to be able to serve as that function once we get there, right? So to make sure that those facilities are able to provide some services in times of disruption and are set up for that. And I think that can benefit both from an operational side and capacity, as well as it can from, serving that community need as well. So that's why it's kind of in the way, the plan in the way it is, and hopefully we'll be able to have time for that conversation, as well as to be able to invest in our assets in a nearer term as those opportunities become available through like the comprehensive facilities assessment and what comes out of that.
Thanks, Bridget. Vice Mayor Kilgore?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you could please just have everyone check their phone and see who has their phone on, because it was very difficult to hear Bridget.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
I think there's some background noise in the office, so I apologize for that.
Your office, then, Bridget. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing from you, Bridget, there is that there's two parts of resilience hubs. A resilience hub needs the physical building, and why I'm kind of wanting to make sure that we make sure when we're looking at all of our facilities, we're looking at our physical buildings so that they can be solar ready, or they can have storage batteries or whatever. And then you're saying there's a programming side that the community already has ownership in some of those spaces. And we want to make sure that the programming for those resources is developed thoughtfully and in partnership at the pace of trust with the community members. And so those two elements combined are part of the core concept of a resilience hub. And so there's some more work to get the programming side prepared, but that the infrastructure side will be wrapped into as we're thinking about infrastructure in the coming years as well. Okay, thanks for letting me restate it just to make sure it's locking in.
And the services that the community wants might be different based on where they are, right? And what role they want the city to play. And so we're not like the driver of that conversation. We're a partner, and that's why it's in the partner bucket. And then we have our assets in our goal one assets buckets, to be clear about where our roles are and what our opportunity is.
That's really helpful.
You ready for the climate
Thanks for going through the
program?
list. Yeah.
I wrote them down. So
unless anyone else had thoughts on the resilience hubs. No? Okay.
So the Climate Ambassador Program, this really gets to Councilwoman Smith's earlier point about fatigue, community fatigue in terms of how we engage. And so trying to figure out if there's a way to kind of build some capacity, kind of building off the work that we did through the Climate Justice Initiative, where we interviewed some like specific community leaders. We did some story circles and trying to figure out how do we build like an infrastructure where people who are interested, have that lived experience, can participate in a way that's mutually beneficial and more sustainable. And so that's where this idea came from. We would love to have a youth, component to this, but it's not specifically targeted just at youth. I think that right now we are working on the Community Engagement Academy, I think is what it's called, that the communications and public engagement team is doing, right? They're kind of like piloting out this model, and we've been able to be a part of that project team to figure out how we can have those conversations in the sustainability space and what that role is. But we're trying to be really mindful, again, why this isn't a short-term piece is to like really figure out what's in the landscape, really figure out what our community wants to see, like, is this really a good idea? Or is this just a good idea that, you know, we have right now in this moment?
Neat. That sounds really, I appreciate you hearing a little more depth and understand kind of the due diligence required yet. All right, that goes through my big old list. Thank you. Other thoughts or questions for staff or the consultant team that prepared this? I'll remind folks that this is for information today. This gives the community, this gives everyone on council plenty of time to review and digest a bulky report. It has great ideas in it. So it'll come back to our committee in a month for consideration of recommending for adoption to council. So this isn't the last time we'll see it, but other thoughts now that we want staff to be thinking on before this comes back to us?
I think a lot during this conversation, I thought a lot about not only youth involvement, but their leadership. Because the environmental justice field has been changed tremendously by youth voices. And because they were so passionate and knowledgeable, more people wanted to listen. So when we go back to the conversation we had earlier about people just shutting down, when we try to engage them to have beneficial conversations, it's just kind of moot sometimes. So I'm wondering, and when we talked earlier about climate ambassadors, if we can find more youth voices to go out and educate the public ahead of our engagement so that we can have some high level conversations. And I believe that youth are very, I think the community is very receptive to being educated by the youth because they own the future. So let's kind of reframe their involvement. We don't want their voice. We need their leadership. And I think they'll be very passionate and proficient.
I think that's an excellent point.
Agreed. 3 cheers. Because ultimately, this stuff all gets passed down. And so really supporting that leadership now. All right. Thank you, staff and AECOM, for joining us today. I think that that ends that item of the agenda. The final item of the agenda is the second round of public comment. The first round, we didn't have any public comment, but maybe there's some folks who want to chime in now. So item 7 on the agenda. Is there anyone in the queue to chat with us today?
I will check right now. 1 moment.
Thanks.
No, there is not.
Okay, so 2 rounds of public comment, no comment. So maybe we'll look to adjust in the future. But we can talk about that as we prepare the coming agenda.
Yeah, how do we want to test that? Because sometimes when there are hot topics, we get a lot more people to call. And just time management wise, it's best to have at the beginning and at the end. Is there any way we can gauge that ahead of time? Because it seems like a trigger would be if they call in or if they send in an email comment. Like sometimes it seems like it's a good case, but today's example is it's just not best that we have at the beginning and end. It saves more time if we just go through and open it up at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion of, staff always lets us know if we have email comments or voicemail comments ahead of time. So perhaps we could try that where if that's a signal to us that there are some topics with a lot of interest, we retain having 2 sections of public comment, but if not, we could revert to 1. What do you think about that? I'm open. I don't have a real strong opinion. Just want to.
I think the intention of putting public comment at the beginning was to be mindful of the working class voice. Sometimes they can't sit throughout an entire meeting. It'd be best for them to be heard at the beginning of the meeting, and then they can go on about their day and not have to sit through a long meeting. So with the equity intention, maybe there's a way that we can look for those certain signals or just know topics might be of interest to a larger portion of the community and kind of play it that way.
Sandra, any thoughts? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
It just depends because like Shanika did make a very good point that a lot of people want to make comments, but they don't want to sit through the whole, meeting. So that does make plenty of sense. And then you do have people that want to make it comments after, because after they've heard things, they may want to comment. I really don't see a need for me to change that process, because basically, as far as the public comment, it's more or less going to dictate, because just like today, we didn't have any, only took 5 seconds to say we didn't have it. And then, at the end, so I don't really see a big reason to change it at this time, because the public safety has always been a major issue and people do like to call in, especially when they have topics of concern. So,
Yeah, let's
That's well
play
said.
case by case. And Katie is usually really proactive in letting you know how many people are in a queue before you start the meeting. And that'll give you information on whether just to host it at the beginning and end or not.
Good talk. That's
I hate to do away with it, and then there'll become a great need for it. But
yeah, I think both of your points are good. It can be very situational depending on what the conversation is, and so yeah, I think the point of it only takes a second or so to say it. We can keep seeing if it really obstructs us, but it sounds like it's kind of no harm, no foul at this point. So if there's any context that changes us, we can look at that in the moment, but otherwise kind of keep on this track is what I'm hearing. And that makes sense. Good talk. That's really good to have a discussion about. All right. Any other thoughts from the team? If not, we can adjourn for the day. All right. Bye everyone. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.